There are destinies written with invisible ink, and waiting for the exact moment to reveal themselves before our eyes. There are loves so deep they defy the laws of the universe, and there are men who believe they can rewrite what is already traced in the stars. This is the story of a father who tried to deceive destiny, and of a magnificent animal that became an instrument of fate, and of a boy whose brief life left an indelible mark on the arid lands of West Texas. We invite you to join us in this tale that reminds us how fragile we are before forces beyond our control, and in how powerful a father's love can be when willing to sacrifice everything to protect his son. Do not forget to share your reflections in the comments, and because these real-life stories touch us all in the deepest part of the soul. And prepare to know a truth that has passed from generation to generation, and whispered in the nights on the ranches, and remembered every time someone pronounces the name of Robert Mitchell and Lightning the Bull. In the vast plains of West Texas, where the sun punishes mercilessly and the thirsty land begs for each drop of rain, stood the Oak Valley Ranch. It was an immense property that extended as far as the eye could see, with thousands of head of cattle grazing under the infinite sky. The owner of all that was Robert Mitchell, a 50-year-old man whose name was spoken with respect throughout the region. Mr. Mitchell had built his fortune with sweat and determination. He inherited barely a piece of arid land from his deceased father, but with vision and tireless work, he transformed that desert into a prosperous empire. His ranch hands admired him because he never asked them to do something he himself had not done before. He knew every corner of his ranch, every water source, every pasture where the cattle found food during drought seasons. The ranch's main house was imposing, built with stone and timber, with wide corridors and an interior courtyard where a fountain sang day and night. Robert had married late, at 38 years old, to Grace, a woman from the city who had brought with her education and refinement. She learned to love that harsh land, adapting to ranch life with grace and strength. For 12 long years, the marriage prospered in everything except what they most desired, a son. They visited doctors, prayed in the chapel Robert had built, made promises to saints. Grace endured pitying looks, while Robert hid an emptiness that no fortune could fill. When Grace finally became pregnant in the 13th year of marriage, the joy on the ranch was indescribable. Robert organized a celebration that lasted an entire week. Every detail of the pregnancy was cared for with obsession. Every discomfort of Grace was reason for immediate consultation with the most experienced midwife in the region. The day his son was born, when the sunrise sun painted the sky gold and purple, Robert Mitchell cried for the first time since he was a child. They named him Matthew, and from that instant he became the absolute center of his parents' existence. In the same year Matthew was born, an exceptional calf also came into the world in the ranch corrals. During a night of electrical storms, when lightning tore through the dark sky, one of Robert's best cows gave birth to a calf black as night itself, with eyes that shone with unusual intelligence. The foreman, a man named Stephen Hayes who had worked on the ranch for 20 years, was the one who assisted the birth. When he saw the calf stand up with surprising strength for a newborn, he knew that animal was special. The small bull bellowed with power, as if announcing his arrival to the world. Robert, upon seeing the calf the next morning, was impressed by its size and vigor. At that moment lightning flashed in the sky, last vestige of the night storm, and Robert declared, "He will be called Lightning, because he was born with the power of the storm." Lightning the bull grew fast and strong, becoming the pride of the ranch. At 2 years old he was already the most imposing animal seen in the region, with majestic horns that curved upward like polished lances. The ranch hands spoke of him with admiration and respect, because he was powerful but also noble, a magnificent stud whose offspring improved the herd year after year. Stephen developed a special relationship with Lightning. It was he who fed him, who cared for him when he was sick, who could approach without fear the imposing animal. "This bull has a soul," the foreman would say, and although some mocked, many agreed. Matthew grew as a healthy but fragile child. prone to fevers that left him bedridden for days. Every time he got sick, the entire ranch held its breath. Robert would not sleep until the fever went down, remaining next to his son's bed, watching every breath, praying in silence. Grace tried to calm her husband, but deep down she shared his fear. They had waited so long for that child that the idea of losing him was unbearable. Sometimes, in the stillness of the night, Robert would watch his son sleep and an icy fear would invade him. What if fate was cruel? What if after so much waiting, it would snatch away what they loved most? This constant fear led Robert to make a decision that would change everything. In the town of Santa Rosa, 2 days' ride away, lived a woman known as the card reader. Her real name was Carmela Santos, but few used it. She was a woman about 50 years old, with penetrating dark eyes and hands adorned with antique rings. It was said she could see the future, that her predictions always came true in one way or another. Robert had never believed in superstitions. He was a practical man of business and hard work. But the love for Matthew and the fear of losing him pushed him beyond his skepticism. One morning, without telling Grace where he was going, he rode towards Santa Rosa. He needed to know. He needed to be sure his son would be okay. The journey to Santa Rosa was long and solitary. Robert rode through dry fields, dusty small towns, and roads that snaked between arid hills. As he advanced, he wondered what he was doing. A man of his position consulting a fortune-teller like an ignorant farmer. But love understands neither pride nor social position. He arrived in town at sunset on the second day. Carmela's house was on the outskirts, a modest construction painted in bright colors that contrasted with the gray adobe of the rest of the town. Beaded curtains hung at the entrance, and the aroma of incense floated in the air. When he knocked on the door, Carmela's voice from inside told him to enter, as if she had been waiting for him. The interior was in semi-darkness, illuminated only by candles that projected dancing shadows. Carmela was seated before a table covered with an embroidered cloth, a deck of Spanish cards in her hands. She looked up when Robert entered, and her dark eyes studied him with intensity. "Mr. Robert Mitchell," she said without him introducing himself. "You have come from very far with a question that burns your soul." Robert sat down, feeling strangely vulnerable. He tried to explain, but Carmela raised a hand to silence him. "Shuffle the cards while thinking about your question," she instructed with a firm but kind voice. Robert obeyed, his calloused hands manipulating the cards while his mind filled with Matthew's image, with the constant fear of losing him. When he finished, Carmela took the cards and began placing them on the table in a specific pattern. The silence in the room was dense while she studied each card. With each new card revealed, Carmela's expression became more serious, more worried. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned over the last card. She closed her eyes for a long moment, and when she opened them, there were tears shining in them. "Mr. Mitchell," she began with a voice breaking with emotion, "you came seeking the truth about your son, and I must give it to you, though it destroys my heart. The cards speak with terrible clarity. Your son Matthew will die. It will not be from illness or common accident. His destiny is written here with a precision I have rarely seen." She paused, breathing deeply before continuing. "Your son will die pierced by the horns of Lightning the Bull." Time seemed to stop. Robert remained motionless, processing the words he had just heard. Lightning, the magnificent bull that had been born the same year as Matthew, the pride of his ranch, the most valuable animal he possessed. "Are you sure?" he finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Carmela nodded sadly. "Destiny is written, Mr. Mitchell. I can see the when but not the exact how. It will be before the boy turns 8 years old. You can try to change the circumstances, you can take precautions, but the cards show the path leads to the same end." Robert stood up abruptly, knocking over the chair. His mind worked at full speed. If lightning was the threat, then he would eliminate lightning. It was simple. It was logical. He paid Carmela generously, more than she asked for, and left that house with iron determination burning in his chest. He would not sleep. He rode back to the ranch almost without stopping, pushing his horse to the limit. His mind repeated a single thought. He would save his son, no matter the price. Robert arrived at Oak Valley Ranch at dawn on the third day, covered in dust from the road and with eyes reddened from lack of sleep. He went directly to find Stephen Hayes, his trusted foreman. He found him in the corrals, supervising the morning work. Without preamble, without explanations, Robert gave the order that would change everything. "Stephen, I want you to bring Lightning the bull. Lock him in the strongest corral. Tomorrow at dawn, the bull will be slaughtered." Stephen's face transformed into a mask of confusion and pain. Lightning was the best bull they had ever had. Slaughtering him made no sense. "Boss," he began to ask, but Robert's look stopped him. "It is an order, Stephen. Do it now." The foreman nodded slowly, with a heavy heart. He gathered 2 ranch hands and rode toward the distant pastures where Lightning grazed with the rest of the select cattle. The journey took them hours, and Stephen used that time to mentally prepare for what he would have to do. When they arrived, Lightning was by the creek, his black coat shining under the midday sun. The bull raised his enormous head upon seeing them approach, recognizing Stephen. He allowed the foreman to approach, to place the rope around his neck. But there was something different about the animal that day, a restlessness, as if he knew something bad was about to happen. The return to the ranch was difficult. Lightning resisted, pulling on the rope, stopping constantly. The ranch hands had to work together to keep him moving. Stephen felt each pull of the rope like a pull on his own heart. He had raised this animal since it was born, had watched it grow into the magnificent specimen it was now. They arrived at the ranch at dusk. They locked Lightning in the strongest corral, built with thick timbers and reinforced with iron beams. The bull walked in circles, occasionally hitting the walls with his horns, snorting with agitation. Stephen stayed there long after the other ranch hands left, watching the animal that had been like a friend. That night Stephen could not sleep. He heard Lightning's low and sad bellows from his corral, and each sound was like a knife in his chest. He did not understand why Mr. Mitchell had ordered this, and that lack of understanding tormented him. At dawn, when the first rays of sun illuminated the sky, the men in charge of carrying out the slaughter gathered. Robert appeared with a stone face, absolute determination in his eyes. Stephen saw something else there too. Fear. His boss was afraid of something, and that fear had led to this incomprehensible decision. "Proceed," Robert ordered with a firm voice. What followed was quick but brutal. Lightning fought with all his considerable strength, his bellows of protest resonating throughout the ranch. But in the end, several men working together could do more than even that magnificent bull. When it was all over, when Lightning lay motionless on the corral floor, a strange silence fell over the ranch. It was as if everyone instinctively knew that something important, something significant, had been destroyed that day. Robert observed the bull's lifeless body with a mixture of relief and sadness. He had done what was necessary. He had eliminated the threat. His son was safe now. The prophecy could not be fulfilled without the bull. He repeated these words to himself over and over, trying to convince himself, ignoring the small voice in his mind that whispered doubts. He ordered Lightning's body to be processed in the usual manner. The meat would be distributed, the hides treated. When someone suggested preserving the head with its impressive horns as a trophy, Robert shook his head sharply. He did not want to see that head, did not want any reminder of the bull he had to sacrifice. The head was left aside in the corral, with the intention of discarding it later. But in the bustle of the day, with all the other tasks requiring attention, Lightning's head was simply forgotten. It remained there, in a corner of the backyard where old tools and lumber for future repairs accumulated. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. Robert never told Grace about the visit to Carmela or about the prophecy he had heard. He carried that secret alone, like an invisible weight that never left his shoulders. Matthew grew, developing into an intelligent and curious child. At 3 years old he ran through the ranch courtyards. At 4, Robert gave him his first pony. At 5, the boy was already accompanying his father on short tours of the property. He was a cheerful child, full of questions about everything he saw, with a laugh that brightened even the hottest days. But Robert lived in constant tension. He watched Matthew's every move, got nervous every time the boy played in any way that could be considered remotely dangerous. Grace noticed her husband's overprotection and it worried her, but when she tried to talk about it, Robert always found excuses. Every night, before sleeping, Robert entered Matthew's room and watched his son sleeping, looking for signs of illness or danger, making sure he was breathing normally. There were moments when he almost convinced himself he had succeeded, that by eliminating Lightning he had changed his son's destiny. 5 years had passed since the bull's sacrifice, and Matthew was alive and well. Maybe Carmela had been wrong. Maybe his decisive action had really altered the course of destiny. These thoughts brought him momentary relief, but doubt always returned. In the ranch's backyard, Lightning's head remained forgotten among tools and lumber. Time and the elements had done their work, the flesh had rotted, the eyes had disappeared, and what remained was mainly the skull bleached by the sun with its massive horns still intact, curving upward, sharp and deadly even in death. Matthew turned 7 in a joyful celebration. The entire ranch family participated in the party, with music, food, and laughter. The boy received gifts, blew out the candles on his cake, and his laugh filled the house. Robert watched everything with a mixture of joy and growing relief. Less than a year remained until Matthew turned 8. If they passed that time without incidents, maybe the prophecy had really been defeated. 2 weeks after the birthday, on a particularly hot summer day, Matthew was playing in the backyard with 3 children of the ranch workers. They were playing cowboys, running and shouting with the inexhaustible energy of childhood. It was then that Matthew saw Lightning's skull for the first time. For him, it was nothing more than a fascinating object, a little scary but exciting. He knew nothing about Lightning the bull, did not know the story of the magnificent animal that had been sacrificed years ago. For Matthew, it was simply a bull skull with impressive horns. The children gathered around the skull, examining it with interest. They began inventing stories about the bull, imagining it had been a fierce and dangerous animal. They decided the skull would be perfect for their games, and placed it in the center of an open area of the yard. They played pretending it was a dangerous bull they had to avoid or capture. Matthew, being the bravest, was the one who approached the skull most, touching the horns with courage while the other children shouted fake warnings. Time passed while the children played, absorbed in their imaginary world. In the main house, Grace finished supervising the preparation of lunch. She came out to the corridor and called her son with a clear voice. "Matthew, son, come eat. It is lunchtime." Matthew heard his mother's voice and, like the obedient child he was, immediately stopped playing. He said goodbye to his friends and began running toward the house. He was a child full of energy, and his instinct was always to run instead of walk. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds, but for those who witnessed it, it seemed to unfold in slow motion. The yard had a slight slope, with some stones scattered about, remnants of some previous construction project. One of these stones protruded from the ground just enough to be a hazard. Matthew was running through the yard, his small body moving fast, when his foot hit the stone. He stumbled, his body thrown forward by his own momentum. His arms extended instinctively, trying to cushion the fall, but he fell directly toward where Lightning's skull was with its horns pointing upward. Grace's scream tore through the air. She began running toward her son, but she was too far away. Stephen, who was working nearby, heard the scream and turned just in time to see the moment of impact. Matthew fell onto Lightning's horns. One of them penetrated his chest with terrible precision, as if 5 years of waiting had guided its trajectory. There was no time for screams, only a choked gasp, and then silence. Grace arrived first, falling to her knees beside her son. Her screams of anguish brought everyone running. Stephen arrived moments later and, with trembling hands, carefully lifted Matthew, separating him from the horns that had pierced him. A single look was enough to know there was no hope. Robert was one of the last to arrive. He had been in the stables when he heard the commotion, and something in the quality of the screams told him something horrible had happened. He ran toward the yard with his heart beating so hard he thought it would explode. When he arrived and saw the scene, he stopped dead. There was his son, his Matthew, his reason for living, lying in Stephen's arms with blood soaking his clothes. There was Grace, his wife, kneeling with hands covered in blood, sobbing. And there, stained with his son's blood, was Lightning's skull, with its horns pointing accusingly toward the sky. In that moment, Robert understood with terrible and absolute clarity. The prophecy had been fulfilled. Despite everything he had done, despite sacrificing Lightning years ago, despite his constant vigilance, destiny had found its way. His son had died on Lightning the bull's horns, exactly as Carmela had predicted. It did not matter that the bull had been dead for 5 years. Destiny could not be mocked, only delayed. Robert fell to his knees beside his wife and son, and a scream came from the deepest part of his being, a sound of pain and desperation so profound that those who heard it said later they would never forget that sound. He took Matthew from Stephen's arms, cradling his son against his chest, rocking him as he had done when he was a baby. Tears ran freely down his face as he whispered, "Forgive me, my son. I tried to save you. I tried to change your destiny. But in my arrogance, I only managed to ensure it would happen." The doctor arrived hours later, but could only confirm what everyone already knew. Matthew had died almost instantly. Even if it had happened in the best hospital, there would have been nothing to do. In the days that followed, while they prepared Matthew's funeral, Robert finally told Grace everything. He spoke to her about the visit to Carmela, about the prophecy, about Lightning's sacrifice, about the years of vigilance and constant fear. Grace listened without interrupting, and when he finished, there were tears in her eyes. "You should have told me," she said finally. "That burden was not yours alone to carry. We were his parents, both of us." "I wanted to protect you from that fear," Robert responded with a broken voice. "I wanted you to be able to enjoy our son without the shadow of the prophecy ruining every moment. And instead, you carried that shadow alone," Grace said softly, taking his hand. Stephen, when he finally knew the complete truth, understood why his boss had ordered Lightning's sacrifice years ago. In a way, they had all been pieces on a larger chessboard, moved by forces none could see or fully understand. The funeral was held 3 days later. Matthew was buried in the small family cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch. The priest spoke about God's will and the mysteries of destiny, but these words sounded hollow before the magnitude of the loss. Robert ordered Lightning's skull to be buried deeply in a remote place on the property. Stephen did it in the darkness of night, digging until his hands bled, as if by burying the bull's physical remains he could also bury the horror of what had happened. The following months were the darkest in Robert and Grace's lives. Their marriage, which had been strong and full of love, was tested to its limits by the weight of shared pain. There were days when they could barely look at each other without the pain of loss overwhelming them. Robert worked from before dawn until long after nightfall, as if he could escape his pain through physical exhaustion. But every night, when he finally stopped, reality hit him again. His son was dead, and everything he had done to save him had only served to ensure the prophecy was fulfilled. Grace found comfort in prayer and in helping the ranch families. She began teaching the workers' children to read and write, finding a strange relief in being surrounded by young life, although each child reminded her of Matthew. It was Grace who finally found the words they both needed to hear. One night, sitting together on the patio under the stars, she took her husband's hand and said, "We cannot change what happened. We cannot bring Matthew back. But we can choose what to do with the time we have left. We can become bitter and closed off, or we can try to create something meaningful from our loss." Those words were the beginning of their healing. It was not quick or complete, because that kind of pain never completely disappears. But slowly, they found a way to move forward. They established a school on the ranch for the children of all the workers in the region, not just their own. They improved the living conditions of families, built a clinic where a doctor came twice a week. They did all this in memory of Matthew, making sure his short life had a lasting impact. Robert never saw Carmela again, the card reader. He did not need to. He had learned the hardest lesson, that there are things in life we cannot control, no matter how much power or wealth we have, no matter how much love we feel or how much we are willing to sacrifice. But he had also learned another lesson, perhaps more important, that even when we cannot control the great events of our lives, we still have control over how we respond to them. Destiny had determined when and how his son would die, but it could not control how Robert and Grace chose to live afterward. Years later, when Robert Mitchell was already an old man with white hair and back bent by the weight of time, he sometimes climbed the hill where Matthew was buried. He sat beside his son's grave and spoke to him, telling him about the lives that had changed thanks to the school, about the children who now had opportunities their parents never had. "I could not save you, my son," he would say with a soft voice, "but I found a way to honor your memory. Every child who learns to read, every family that receives medical care, every improvement we make on this ranch, is a tribute to you. Your life was brief, but your impact will be eternal." The story of Robert Mitchell and Lightning the Bull became legend throughout the region. People told it in low voices, reflecting on destiny, on a father's love, on how even our most desperate attempts to change the inevitable can become the very instruments that ensure its fulfillment. But the story also taught something deeper, that although we cannot control our destiny, we can control how we face that destiny. We can choose bitterness or generosity, despair or hope, isolation or service. Robert and Grace chose love and service. And in that choice, they transformed their tragedy into something that continued giving life and hope long after the sharpest pain had passed. When Robert Mitchell finally closed his eyes for the last time, decades after losing his son, he did so in peace. He was buried beside Matthew on that hill, and Grace followed him 3 years later. The three remain there until today, a family reunited in death as they were in life. And every time someone passes by Oak Valley Ranch, every time a child learns to read in the school they founded, every time a family receives help in difficult times, Matthew's memory continues alive, not as a victim of destiny, but as a symbol that even the most terrible tragedy can be transformed into a force for good. Because that is the true lesson of this story, that love transcends even death itself, that pain can become purpose, and that every life, no matter how brief, has value and meaning if those who remain choose to honor it with their actions. Destiny wrote the end of Matthew's life, but Robert and Grace wrote his legacy. And that legacy continues alive in every act of kindness, in every hand extended to help, in every life improved by the work they began in memory of their beloved son. This is the story told on nights in West Texas, when families gather and grandparents share with grandchildren the lessons of life. It is a story that reminds us we are fragile before forces we do not understand, but also that we are immensely powerful in our capacity to love, to forgive, to create meaning even in the midst of the deepest pain. May the story of Robert, Grace, and Matthew teach us to value every moment with our loved ones, to express our love without reservation while we have time, and to find the strength to transform our losses into legacies of hope and compassion. If this story touched your heart as it has touched the hearts of thousands through generations, I invite you to leave a like so more people can know it. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you do not miss more stories that remind us what really matters in life. And please, share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of the power of love and human resilience. Leave us in the comments. Do you believe destiny can be changed, or is everything written before birth? Have you experienced moments where you felt something was destined to happen? Your reflections enrich our community and help us all grow.